Hello, welcome back to the Climbing Nomads YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at how to clean, maintain and inspect your cams. So before you can inspect your cams, it's always good to actually give them a good thorough clean, and that way any dirt or grease isn't going to hide up any faults in the cam itself. So to clean it, get yourself a tub of warm water, so nothing more than about 50 degrees. If your cam is particularly dirty, then use a very mild detergent like washing up liquid, but just use a small amount, and do remember to rinse it afterwards as well. So to clean it, get your tub of water, get a soft toothbrush, and you're just submerging the head of the cam here. And as you put it in the water, do remember to sort of action the trigger as well, so to move the cams up and down. And at the same time, aim to brush in between the lobes where the axle joins the cam and get rid of any dirt that way. Okay, once you've given it a good wash, a good brush, and it's rinsed off, then leave it to dry somewhere out of direct sunlight and away from any direct heat sources, so don't drape it over a radiator or anything. So once your cam's all been brushed and cleaned and also dried, it's time to lube it up. So we're aiming to get lube into all the little moving parts essentially, so in between where the lobes meet the axle, and also just in here, just underneath the heads of the rivets as well. The oil you use is also important. Do you get something that's something like duck oil or the super lube? Try and avoid WD-40 or any oils that actually have graphite in them or are a degreasing agent. So avoid WD-40, go with something like duck oil, which is one of the best ones for the lobes. So as you're applying the oil, do remember to action the cam lobes as well, so squeeze the trigger at the same time, just to get the oil really working into those moving sections. Also avoid getting any oil on the sling, because obviously that's going to damage the sling itself because it's a textile. Also avoid getting any oil on the teeth if you can, so that's going to affect the grip strength and the holding power, well, the friction anyway. So do get paper towel or a clean rag of some sort and really thoroughly wipe off any excess around the cams, because once this is all done and it goes back in your rack bag, then you don't want oil on the rest of your rack, like your slings or your runners and things. So once you've given the head a good clean, then it's time to actually inspect it, now that we've got rid of all the grease and the dirt. So one of the first things to consider is actually how old your cam is, and while the metal itself has an indefinite lifespan, the sling does not. So slings and textiles have a shelf life. Depending on who's manufactured it, depends on how long the sling can last for before it should be retired. Usually on average is about 10 years, and that's 10 years shelf life, i.e. it's not actually been used and it's kept in immaculate condition. So companies can re-sling them, so if it's getting beyond that age, then consider whether you need to replace the sling. Okay, so one of the first things to check is the actual camming action itself, and just pulling back on the trigger and just making sure that you've got smooth action throughout with the lobes. You shouldn't get any interference from anything, and it shouldn't feel gritty either. If it does, then you need to go back and clean it a little bit more. One other thing is, from any position of being squeezed, it should snap back and make that sort of very satisfying snap noise. So there shouldn't be, again, anything jamming it or preventing it from reopening. As you're squeezing as well, just double check that the lobes themselves, where they attach to the axles, are moving freely but not wobbling excessively. So you haven't created, from some impact force or a fall, that the lobes haven't actually worn a larger hole where they join the axle. And again, that's something that would require the lobes to be, or the whole cam to be retired in that instance. So they should still feel pretty rigid on the actual axles themselves. Still sticking with the lobes, have a look down the length of the lobes, so in this direction, and you're checking to see that it still lies straight, that it's not kinked or deformed in any way, and check each lobe Remember to turn it 180 as well and check the other 2 lobes. Also look for any sort of sharp areas or burrs that might have developed. It's not going to directly impact the cam lobe itself, but it might impact something like the sling in your rack bag or a quick draw. It might actually start cutting through it. Thirdly, also check to see that there aren't any flat spots. So if it has received some sort of high impact, i.e. it's taken a fall, it might actually flatten sections of the lobes. So again, checking for that. And then finally, check there's no actual corrosion anywhere on any of the lobes. So getting a good thorough 360-degree check. So once we've checked the action and we've checked the lobes, there's quite a lot of paths to a cam, check the terminating rivet heads and the plates as well. So on both sides. So you're checking to see that these aren't bent or kinked or deformed in any way. Again, that they haven't got any corrosion on them and that the rivet heads are still securely in place as well. So just give them a couple of quick checks. Okay, so working our way down the cam now. We've checked the lobes, checked the terminating plates, check the trigger wires. So these aren't actually load bearing necessarily or strength related, but they do affect how quickly and easily you can actually place the cam. So it's worth making sure that these are in good working order. So to check these, make sure that the wires themselves are running pretty straight, that there aren't any significant bends or anything in them. If they have got a bend, then you can just tease it straight with your hands. Don't use pliers or anything, because that might deform and actually weaken the metal wires themselves. And check it systematically. So start at the top where it joins the lobes, check the little rivet heads, make sure that they're actually in place and secure on all 4. There's 2 on the inside as well. Check each trigger wire is working in isolation, and then just giving a visual inspection on the swaging and the wires as well. Check the swaging hasn't got any significant damage to it, any corrosion or any sharp edges, and again the same with the wires. Make sure it's not got any wires poking out which would otherwise damage other parts of your rack. And finally with the triggers, the trigger wires, just make sure that all 4 lobes work at the same rate. So as you pull down and release, that they all release at the same rate, that one's not sticking. Okay, so once you check the lobes and the trigger wires, time to check the stem. So again, systematically work away from the lobes backwards. So have a look to see where it joins the actual head of the cam, and just make sure, if you can, pull back on any coverings and inspect the wires, the wire bundle underneath, and make sure none of the wires are damaged, that the joint itself isn't corroded or damaged or cracked in any way, and also where it joins the thumb catch as well, make sure that that's all solid. Also check that the trigger wires don't sort of get stuck on the stem at all. And then finally with the stem, have a look at the actual thumb catch. So where the sling actually meets the head of the stem, check that there isn't any sharp edges, there aren't any sharp edges or burrs or anything which are obviously going to start cutting up the sling. So have a good feel around there and check in the holes as well. And lastly, check the sling. So much like you would check any other textile part of your rack, be systematic. So start in one particular spot and you're checking all the way along the length of the sling, making sure that all the stitching is in place. Check underneath to see that all the bar tack stitching is still there and not damaged in any way. And as you move along the sling, have a feel, check to see there aren't any particular hard spots in the sling where something might have impacted it or heated it to any extent. Do remember to move the sling through the thumb loop so you can see all of the sling, so you've inspected all of it and not just left some of it in the thumb loop. As you move along it, check systematically for any fraying, any excess abrasion, and obviously any cut strands to the sling. So that's a systematic way of checking your cams. Do remember to give them a good clean and a brush and a little bit of lube just before you inspect them. We do have other tutorials and vlogs, so do check that out on our channel. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye!